Hello, everybody. This is Paul Farren here for Film Ireland, and we're doing our Halloween podcast, introducing two wonderful filmmakers who've got horror films in this weekend's Horrorthon, run by Edwina Queen and co. I'd like to introduce them. We have Jason Figgis on my right, whose new film is called You Don't Recognise Me, Do You?
Close enough. It's called Don't You Recognise Me?
And we have Mark Sheridan, whose film is The Crone Wood.
Just Crone Wood, but close enough.
See, I had to get both of them wrong. So, look, I'm going to just I've introduced the guys, and I'm going to start with Jason, because he's on my right. There's no other reason for that. Jason, tell us a little bit about the background and the making of this movie.
Well, okay, so the film came about. I've been working on a teen vampire film called The Ecstasy of Isabel Mann. And one of the actors in that was a guy called Darren Travers, who played like a 3,000-year-old Greek vampire called Acacius. And on one of our little down days, we were sitting talking, and I said, I'd really like to do a film called Scum. But of course, the brilliant film of Scum in the late 70s starring Ray Winston had already been there. And I thought, I really want to make a film based around the idea of a gangland family and then something happens to them as opposed to them perpetrating something. So they become, in a way, the victims. So I've been talking to Darren, and he says, we're chatting away, and he says, he said to somebody as a joke, don't you recognize me? Because he was out of makeup, and he literally wasn't recognizable. And I just thought, shit, that's the name, Don't You Recognize Me, because it tied in then with the plot of the film. So very basically, the film is about a young filmmaker who decides that he wants to do a series of films called A Day in the Life. And we all know that, like from the art or the Sunday Times supplement and that. But he wants to go around, meet people kind of on the edge of society, see what they're doing, follow them around for the day. Except he kind of gets involved with a guy called Kay, played by this great little actor. I don't mean little, although he's not very tall.
Have fun cutting that out, Steve.
He won't mind. Called Jason Sherlock, who plays his character called Kay, and the filmmaker spends the day with him. But things start off amiably, and then very gradually become not so amiable.
Well, you say that, but I didn't find it amiable. I was kind of tense from the very start.
Well,
knowing the world I was in. But okay, well, just quickly to Mark then, and Mark, introduce your film.
Okay, so my film is Crone Wood. It's my feature debut. It's a found footage film, I guess. I've been told almost not to say that because it's almost a dirty word in the horror community at the moment, but I think there's no point lying about it. Basically, our film sets up, it's about Danny and Hayley, so it's a couple who've just met the night before, and they've spent the night together having fun, and the next morning they decide that they want to up the ante a little bit further, and they suggest going into the woods for the night. And I probably don't want to go too much into the plot.
I was going to say, you're not really at liberty to say too much.
Yeah,
but it's similar to you, Jason. I mean, okay, let's get to the point. We've got two things in common here. We're both working from a documentary format that the horror genre has embraced like crazy since the heady days of Blair Witch. But as you guys know, it did it well before that with Cannibal Holocaust. And I think one or two other movies that I remember vaguely, but they don't come solidly to mind. Tell me, did you approach this because it allowed you a bit of freedom because you didn't have the huge Hollywood budget, or do you simply like that format? I will start with yourself, Jason.
Well, I've been talking to Mark about this earlier. When I made this film, the only way I could make the film, because of the story that it was in a found footage way. So I didn't actually approach thinking, I want to make a found footage film. But it wasn't the opposite of that either. I never said, I want to stay away from that. I've no interest in limiting myself by saying an audience doesn't like a particular subgenre, so I'm not going to do it. Frankly, couldn't give a toss about that. So, it just so happened, if this film was going to work, it had to be a found footage film. There's no other way it could have worked. And it only really came out of the development of the film itself that, as we discussed it, and we kind of went, how are we actually going to do this? And we went, well, the only way is if it's a real film crew, etc., and it's a real documentary type project, which required a lot of rehearsal, almost a year of rehearsal for everyone to be so entrenched in their characters that no matter what you did with the camera, you believed that they were that person. And so that's
well,
pretty
it's
much
true.
it.
I mean, once you put that value of the found footage on it, you're addressing certain rules that you may break, but you can't be seen to break them in a kind of feckless way. Did you find similar issues with approaching it? And
Yeah.
did you feel comfortable with the found footage idea once you got started?
Yeah, it's a funny one. I guess if you're being completely honest about it, from our kind of financial situation, found footage is probably the only realistic option we had to actually say make a film with the budget we had and do it properly. So there's no doubt, like we shot our film in 5 days, which is
Wow, that's
inhuman in many ways. But like on top of that, though, because I think it's a dangerous thing that some people tend to go for that subgenre just because it is cheaper. And they figure they can make a film much easier that way. And I think that's really wrong, quite a dangerous kind of notion to have. I love found footage films, but I'll be the first person to put my hands up and say there's a whole load of them that are pretty awful. Too many people watched like the wonderful Blair Witch Project and got this notion that a few of the lads will just go into the woods, we'll just point a camera at each other, we'll improvise the whole thing, we'll shake the camera a little bit, and that'll make a great successful film. And that's just not the case. I think if you want to make a successful found footage film, you definitely have to understand those rules that are there. I think for me, it was trying to say as true to them as possible. So, like, everything from sound, music, like, it all had to happen in camera for us. We didn't want to kind of bring in some of those elements people do to try and liven it up, you know, or people kind of cheat as well. They find the security camera footage and stuff like that. You know, we wanted to keep it as pure as possible.
Well, immediately you've got another personality in the film by just using that form, and that becomes a style or a characteristic. And I've always been of the belief, you've got to be real pure. But now, I've seen it in comedies abused quite nicely. A good example would be Modern Family. It totally abuses the idea of it being a documentary footage. Now, found footage is a different thing again, I think, slightly. Would you agree? I mean, with yours, I always thought, when I saw yours, Dan, I'm not giving it away, but I always felt it was someone's footage that they kept after the event, and then they might like to look back on themselves. Go and see the film, and you might know what I mean. You've addressed it in a. I can talk about that little mid kind of turn, or would that
Feel free, listen.
When there's
I don't
basically
mind
our
spoilers,
documentary
you know?
crew meet a documentary crew.
Yeah.
And I love that. And then within that, there's another documentary to be looked at while we're watching the documenting. So this is this wonderful domino of who documentary makers are, and having the artivist turned on you, I thought was a lovely idea.
Well, as Zoe Cavan has said, who's in the film and is also a filmmaker, it became like one of the most meta films ever. And she said that herself. She said, wait a minute, I'm a filmmaker, and I'm filming filmmakers making a film, and there's another film within the film. And I thought that was brilliant, you know, because again, that wasn't really planned. It just turned out that way.
Oh yeah, but it has a lovely kind of creepiness about it. Like, where does it all stop?
We shot our movie in 3 days, by the way.
Wow. Okay, and the winner of the Who Shot Their Movie the Fastest, we will discuss the editing speed in a minute. I'll bet you that was another beast. But tell me this, Mark, then with your one, again, it's more of a kind of personable piece of a guy who is using the camera in a little bit of an obsessive way. And he has his one little moral quiver with the camera, right at that little moment in the tent. But it's a pushing back and forth as they kind of interrogate each other to begin with. And again, you introduce the story from another camera's point of view later on.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, what I think, for me, if you're going to do something like this, is I think one of the major quibbles for other people is the fact that why are they still filming and why are they doing this? And I think it's very important to address from the character's point of view. Like, for Jason, your film, it makes sense because they're filmmakers. When you're trying to go the route with me, which I suppose would be the more, let's say, traditional Blair Witchy type approach, even though they were making a documentary too, you do have to justify it, and I think that's a really important thing. And I think it's important that your character has a reason why they'd use it, even if you don't deeply discuss that. It's very important.
It has
that's
to be understood.
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
else you create that one little kernel that bothers the audience, and they can't go with any of the other ideas that you're trying to present.
Yeah, and I think what I wanted to do without making a film that's too heavily going down the road of some kind of themes was touching on the notion of our desire to film things. Like, nowadays, everywhere we go, you have people filming, taking photos, but like every concert, it's just people holding up and looking through their phones the whole time. And the same way with relationships and everything, our memories and our enjoyment of things are becoming connected to us capturing them in the moment as opposed to enjoying them. And then how far that goes. And I suppose at the beginning of our film, we've got Danny, our lead, who is enjoying filming this new girl that he likes, and it comes from a genuine place, but you could debate whether it's somewhat voyeuristic or not. And then with twists that happen later on in the film, it's just when that's turned on you, that becomes uncomfortable and less acceptable.
Which is I hadn't thought of until now, but that's one similar kind of thing with you, with that idea of the documentary maker suddenly being someone else's documentary subject.
Yeah, I mean, I thought I wanted the whole experience to be very uncomfortable, I have to say. To the point of, I don't know whether I said this to you earlier, Mark, but we actually had certain members of the cast who didn't even know what was going to happen in certain sequences.
I would like to actually, let's talk about that now from both points of view. You both went for very short, fast shoots. And I bet there was an awful lot of thought behind why you were doing that in terms of the energy. So, again, continue yourself, Jason. Wonderful performances, as was said, and I think you've won prizes for some of your performances.
Yeah, actually, at Starburst, the Starburst Fantasy Awards, we won the Best Overall Performance Award for Darren Travers, who plays... I'm holding up...
Yeah, he was great. Now, he did have a wonderful scenery chewing character to play, and I thought actually his younger brother deserved as much kudos as he did. The guy who played his younger brother, he was brilliant. He had you by the balls from the moment you met him at the start of the film. Can I send the link on to him, or you send it?
Oh, sure,
I'd love to check it out.
But so
actually, no,
what was you mentioned earlier? You mentioned earlier the rehearsal process was a long time before you went for your 3-day shoot.
We actually had almost a year of rehearsal before we started filming. But the reason for that was the very first piece of footage that we shot was the film within the film that is screened for this film.
Okay, yeah.
So we shot that. It's funny, I can say so very little about it because it kind of gives it away, so I'm kind of self-censoring as I go. But we shot that with the idea that what came out of that footage, everything that followed had to be because of that piece of footage. So we thought, great, I want everyone to look a lot different. I want certain characters to be able to develop themselves in certain ways. And so Darren Travers, again, who played the older brother, the towering brother, he's like head and shoulders taller than everybody in it. They spent a lot of time just hanging out together as family and friends. They'd go down to Sheriff Street, they'd hang out, they'd sit in inner city pubs, they would just wander the streets and talk, and were always in character. So by the time they got on set, they knew exactly what they had to do. They clicked right back into it, no matter who was looking at who, no matter where the camera went. And, there's 2 cameras there when we're filming. Because of the second crew, as you mentioned. So if it turns, you better be in character or it's going to be spotted. So we had that major intensity of whereby, say in the final act of the film, I'm not even sure there is 3 acts, is there? I'm not 100%
we
sure.
won't worry about that.
Yeah, exactly. It's not really that kind of thing.
For 3 actresses for sissies.
Yes. What does that mean?
To focus that, you had done all your directing in terms of your performances before you went to set, and you were really confident because, let's face it, to not give anything else away, but you were on the set as one of the actors, and in a certain way that you couldn't really be keeping an eye on everybody on the day until later on.
No, that's funny because I was with them all the time.
Yeah.
Now the thing was, even at the set where they're being shown the film, I was standing in. There was a little hut building within that large building, and I was there all the time, and I was going, all right, cut, and then we go reset, and I go, no, don't forget, you have to bring it from this point to this point to this point, otherwise we're going to spend forever going around in circles, we're never going to get anywhere. So I would actually appear, in character, because it's fine, people are going to see it. I play a character called Babyface, who's a kind of a strange brother. The eldest brother of them.
A nod to a certain kind of character we've seen in films before.
Yeah, it's an homage.
To not give away in the way, yeah.
It's an homage. But we have some great behind the scenes footage where I come out as a character going, no guys, we really need to. And everyone's going, yes, Jason. So I was.
You wouldn't have directed in the getup he was in. Trust me, you'll find it tomorrow. But tell Mark your own approach. Then obviously you rehearsed, and again I recognise a lot of actors there. Some of my favourite people, Geraldine McAlinden.
Yeah, absolutely,
lovely actress.
In it. Absolutely fantastic.
I get the impression a lot of goodwill and good energy was going on. I think you can always tell when you're watching a film whether things are working. Yeah. You know what I mean? Whether it be the darkest, most intense film or not, you know whether they get on. You watch a film where you people feel that they were actually having a good time.
Absolutely, and the reality is when you're doing a film under that kind of a time scale and also just with limited resources and stuff like that, the cast and the crew obviously made such a huge difference, and that was one of the things that really helped me through it because it was such an ordeal to try and fit it all in because you've seen the film. There's enough action in it that takes time to actually get in there, and it was amazing when it even came to say 1 o'clock in the morning and you're up by the Hellfire Club and stuff like that. Even when I was starting to wane, like they were always there and ready and wanting to do it right, you know, and that makes a huge difference when we're making these kind of films, because we were actually, Jason and me were talking about it earlier on, when it comes to found footage, actually I think you get away with bad acting a lot less than you would in a normal film.
I totally agree.
The quality has to, because if it's not believable enough, it actually blows it much quicker than you would have in, say, a standard stock film.
And sometimes it's just like that bad acting, you go, okay, if this was a drama, I'd actually buy that performance.
Absolutely.
But I can feel them acting in front of the camera for this notion of this fictional. We're back to the meta thing again.
Yeah, no, which is a real challenge.
One thing you both marked is that you cannot underestimate that energy that you need to provide as the central force for everybody else, and you can't teach that in college. That kind of thing of the camaraderie and the collaboration. I think that's a huge aspect that no one seems to understand until they get onto a set and they've got to do it. Would you agree?
I completely would, because I think particularly, say, again on the lower budget type side of things, you're forced into, like, under a situation where you're going to have to be a good director. You're going to have to be able to manage these difficult situations, while some people who may have started on a bigger budget production the first time, these are challenges they'll never have had to face. And some of those people can crumble under that kind of pressure. I think if you can make a film under the circumstances that we're making them, you know well that if it comes to the next stage where there's more money in place, you're going to walk through it that way. You know, because these are challenges that normal filmmakers wouldn't be used to hitting up to and actually having to cope with, because there's no way you can turn around. There's no extra days shooting. You have to get it. And that brings a kind of an immediacy, but that can actually bring something to the film as well, because there's a respect on set, and the actors realize that first take, that has to be a counting take. They don't take 2 or 3 to get there. Every single one counts.
I think it was Elia Kazan said that part of the director's job is to create the atmosphere that helps those on, whether it be the actor or the crew, find that magic moment, those kind of found things. Did you both find that? Did you find that, Jason, that there was so many things going?
Yeah, because one thing is, and it's kind of in a way echoing what you're saying, is that I couldn't work with people I didn't like or didn't get on well with. You just can't, because you immediately feel a negative energy in your production that is just throwing everything off. So I tend to develop relationships with people for months before I do a project, so that I go, you really into this, you really want to do it, you see their passion, you see how much work they're putting into character. Like Darren Travers presented me with 100 pages of notes on in the film. And I was just blown away by that. You know, the fact that he was so, you know, when he won his award, he won't mind me saying, he burst into tears because he'd never won an award. And he thought, I won the overall award. He just couldn't believe that was being honoured in that way for all the work that he had done. And he's that kind of guy. So the way I look at it is that if everybody isn't hugely immersed in it, it's not going to work. And again, in a way, I'm repeating myself. Literally repeating myself, in that if the camera turns and they're not in it, you're going to capture that. And as you said, Mark, rightly so, if the acting isn't way better than most other types of acting and other types of film, you're just not going to get away with it. And one thing I always say to reviewers, I give them the film and I say, I don't care if you don't like the movie. I said, but you will not be able to say that there's bad acting in this movie. And all of them have come back. I had one guy in America, Ravenous Monster, saying, I really don't like these kind of movies, but boy, that acting is great in that movie, you know? And I was like, job done. And I ended up responding to him, and he goes, thank you very much. Considering you played Babyface, I really take that. You know? And it's true.
But there's also a kind of surreal contradiction in that, because you're obviously drawn into it if you're watching the performances anyway.
But that's what I believe as well. I believe that utterly, that no matter what film you're watching, if you hook on a character and you're really sucked in by them, eventually you don't even care what the genre of film is. If you're really immersed in it with that character.
Well, that's the big deal, is to try and escape the trappings of any genre. It's like, okay, I'm just interested because these characters are at play in this particular scenario.
You look at the Dardenne brothers, for example, right? A lot of their movie is a character walking endlessly from one place to the other, you know, with this idea in mind. But the acting is so superb. They keep winning the Palme d'Or, you know?
But don't forget that. So I think as well as directors, and this is where people forget, acting is also environment and place and all the other things that you put in place for them to engage with. That is also telling the story.
Yeah.
It's like the old thing of lassie acting, I call it, you know, where you go like, well, the dog looks left, and you go, oh my God, what's going on over there? What a wonderful performance. Yeah, the dog looked left. But yeah, but everything else was in place that made the audience feel that emotion that was going on.
Big time.
Let's talk about independent production. Okay, I don't want to start revealing how much money you paid in your film. In fact, I think it'd be vulgar to discuss money. But you guys went and did this, and it does seem to be happening a little bit more, and especially in the horror genre. How tough do you find it, though, on the other end now, as you're trying to sell it and get people to see it in festivals? And I know that's the hardest part. I think I've found in the past, with myself and other people, that you start getting into festival politics sometimes, not simply being judged on whether your film is good or bad, but have you gone the right way around getting it done? And if you want to elaborate on that, maybe start with Jason and then Mark.
Yeah, definitely the festival thing with me is, I don't know, it's a slight bugbear in that there is a lot of political issues with film festivals. One, they either have an agenda for that year, so they decided the kind of movie that they want to take on and they want to show. Or secondly, actually, I'm not even sure what the secondly is. Well, either your film's really...
Firstly's enough.
Yeah, firstly. Either your film's really shit or they have an agenda. Or it's really shit and they don't have an agenda, you know, whatever. But yeah, I think that it's funny. You're talking about distribution, things being seen. The vampire film, for example, we got a deal on that, and I'd only sent it here. And I have a sales agent in LA, and he was saying, "Will you send your fucking film to festivals, will you?" And I said, "But you got a deal. Surely the point is, get them seen in festivals, and then somebody offers you a deal." I wanted the vampire film out there. You know, it's got a really good distribution deal. In other words, it'll be everywhere in the US and Canada at Christmas. In fact, it's going out like the 15th of December, so it's a perfect week to be going out. And VOD as well, all over the place. And not only that, it's an American Canada release, but it's region free, which means it can be bought by anyone on Amazon. So to me, that's like a worldwide distribution deal for it. So, and I'm not saying that saying whoopee-dee, I got a big deal. What I'm actually trying to say is that the fact that the digital world is so open now for people, it's really more about marketing your film than getting it into the best festivals now. Because if you have one laurel on your thing, but you've loads of great review quotes, what's always been more important to me when I pick up a DVD, if there's great quotes, I go, yeah, I want to see that movie. And great artwork, because, you know, Mark, presentation is so much
100%.
of this game. So if you're marketing it right, in a way, the field has been democratized for independent filmmakers because the internet is open. You can now put your film out. You can get it up on Facebook. You can get all these friends interested. You can buy like 100,000 views on Twitter for $10. You know what I mean? You can get your stuff out there. You just have to be clever.
So you've done your homework about.
You have to.
But see, that's why people do get caught up in the idea that they have to get into festivals to build up a bit of kind of credence for the movie in order to get the next step. And you do see it with a lot of films that are even like, say, we mentioned Ben Wheatley earlier.
Yeah.
I mean, High Rise required a certain festival kind of exposure,
to build it up,
or it was deemed to need it.
Yeah.
But again, I said, like, distribution models are changing and they're getting turned upside down now, and Netflix have really become a big game changer. I mean, does that make things hopeful for the future in terms of how you might get it there? And let's face it, make some money so you can go and make another movie.
But it's funny you're saying that, and I don't mean to jump in.
No, you're fine.
There, Mark. That I was reviewed there a couple of weeks ago for another film I did called Urban Traffic, and Stephen Porzio, is it? Did the review here at Film Ireland. And one of the very first questions he asked me in an interview was, do you think directors need to go the festival route now because of VOD and the fact that you can get distributed in that way? So again, it's not just filmmakers who are thinking it, it's anyone in the know in the film industry are starting to go, you know, filmmakers can get their work out there and get known just from having a good marketing approach. You know, so it is.
Yeah, no, it's weird. Like, the wonders of the internet is the fact that you can get your film out there, and you can do your own kind of marketing schemes. So it's quite fantastic in that way. However, there's kind of a downfall there where if you don't have either an experienced team behind you or personal experience, which I would have less of since it's my first feature, to be able to do all these things, because marketing in its own right is a totally different job and skill set, you know, than to be able to direct. Like, even on this film, like, I was director, co-producer, writer, editor, colorist, you know, and a couple of other things along the way, and that's fine because we're all happy to push out there. But it is hard, say for Crone Wood poster, I made it myself. You know, yeah, absolutely. With Facebook, we targeted, we got 40,000 views of the trailer, which is great. You can do all these kind of things, but that's still like there's a reason
marketing will always be marketing.
It is, and you know, it's the reason why Blumhouse, the guys who do the Paranormal Activities, Insidious, Sinister films, like, and Conjuring, of course, the reason that like their budget, because I think it's at least 100% on top, if not double that, is their marketing budget. And they know if they show it to enough people, it'll make big returns, which is great. And I've absolutely nothing against the model because it works. The hard thing is for people like us, there isn't really that opportunity to be able to push it out there. So you're relying on good word of mouth and stuff like that. And it is that thing where you believe if your film is seen, that the audience will enjoy it and actually embrace it. It's just getting it seen because there's so much stuff out there. And just getting your film on video on demand, it kind of doesn't mean anything. It's like if your song's on iTunes, it's 1 in 100 million. So,
in fact, that's a good metaphor because that's exactly what it's getting like now.
Yeah.
In terms of kind of video content online.
It is. You need someone to champion you still. And unfortunately, like, festivals originally were very much so that they seem to be a bit more of the political scheme nowadays. Not all of them, of course, but some of them.
People forget as well, festivals make money from being festivals. There's people on a wage every year, and you know that if that film festival didn't exist, they wouldn't get paid.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they're lucky to have people like yourselves making movies trying to get into those festivals to have that little moment.
Especially when you see the price of certain festivals.
Yeah. But that's the other thing I was going to mention was, I mean, the cost of getting into festivals. Your sales agent was great at saying get into festivals. Yeah. Was he offering you any money to?
No, he wasn't. That's the point. It's like, you know, this constant message, get your film into festivals. And I just thought, look, there are certain films that you know, like the teen vampire film. I see it as only having, you know, it was a great learning curve making that film for starters. And it actually started off my whole way of working with actors in an improvised way, and it worked brilliantly in certain cases. Not 100%, but it worked really well, especially the lead girl, Ellen Mullen, who plays Isabel, etc. But I've totally zoned out.
No, what you were saying was the teen vampire film. I think we were talking distribution and where you were going to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So what I had decided with Isabel Mann was that if it got a DVD release, brilliant, that's what I wanted. If it got VOD, brilliant, that's what I wanted. I wanted to use that and the reviews, the really strong reviews and quotes I was getting to further other work. So in a way, more adult work. So moving into something like Don't You Recognize Me, which is an adult film, you know, with adult themes and, you know, very adult performances, you know, and again, trying to create better work all the time. So obviously, Mark, for me, the ideal would be that a major studio would go, we love your movie. It's Absolutely. Like it's the new whatever, and we want it, and we're going to put $100 million behind marketing campaign worldwide. That's what I want, and that's what every filmmaker wants. But I always think that because of digital technology, because it's so good now, that we have the ability, if you have an imagination and you can go out and you have a team make a movie, because you're going to get better with every movie that you make. And you have a better chance of the big boys coming to you and going...
And the bottom line is, you're not just doing it for the money, guys.
Yeah, you're doing it for the love. Absolutely.
Love, obsession, you know.
Well, it's nuts, but it's a nice nuts. It's my favourite kind of nuts. But yeah, so Jason, you in one festival so far, or have you done a few other festivals?
No, the first festival we got into, actually was the first one we sent in for, was Starburst. And actually it was funny about that because we first of all, we got the review, and of course you're terrified. Yeah. You know, I grew up reading Starburst, you know.
Well, I didn't even know they had a festival. It's funny you mentioned it because I got a John Brosnan book last week. Right. Primal Screen. But John Brosnan, those you don't remember, was a wonderful writer for Starburst, died quite young, Australian, and very funny writer that we could all relate to. He came up with my favourite phrase, it's only a movie.
Yeah, it's only a movie.
Absolutely. But that was a nice festival, but again, it's a nice, it seems a left-of-centre festival. And Mark, you haven't got into any other festivals just yet.
No, it's the world premiere this Sunday for us. But like,
so
we did. You know, it's a funny one because with film festivals, you come with it's a tactics and stuff. There's this whole plan. So like, are you aiming at a load of smaller? It's very heartbreaking, and
as you say, it's the last thing to do with making a movie.
But it's a tricky one because, like, so yeah, do you aim at the very top tier festivals and hope you get into one of them and get a big break? Do you aim at the middle tier or the lower? And again, financially, these things all have an effect. But even beyond that, like, say, because there was at some point talk about even potential small and limited theatrical release for Crone Wood, even potentially this year, this Halloween, just even for a day, which would have been incredible. But then you've always got your factors outside of that because the new Blair Witch came out. And it just really didn't light the box office on fire the way they'd hoped it would. And so all of a sudden everyone got cold
reviews
feet.
As well, didn't it?
But everyone just got cold feet. And so, you know, and there's no point like harping on those things or becoming like bitter or resentful. But there's a whole world and industry that's flowing around there that you're not really in control of. And so all you can do is kind of try and ride that wave as best as possible, and I guess negotiate it in whichever way you can, which is limited when you've got the kind of resources we have. But yeah, no, like it wasn't a particularly bad film. I don't think it was as good as it could have been, but it's hard, I guess, when your film is being judged based off other people's work.
Well, as you say, you get tired with the brush of the found footage thing, and that gets tiresome to hear, because then it's not judging the subject matter within those bones, yeah. But
then the whole horror genre gets that in general, because you do hear the whole, it's not bad for a horror film, which is an incredibly derogatory thing to say.
I've become to believe that some of the most honest ideas are in horror films these days. You won't find them anywhere else.
But if you look
with
at
such
Netflix,
honesty,
if you look at Netflix and you see the voting on Netflix, nearly every horror movie on it gets 1 or 1.5 stars, because people universally just vote down horror movies. They don't take them that seriously. So when I'm making a film, what I try and think about first is performance and character. Actually, one reviewer said, the more of your films I watch, the more they feel about mental illness than horror movies. Even with Isabel Mann, they were saying, is it really a girl who's just suffering from mental illness, or is she really a vampire? With Children of a Darker Dawn, it's a post-apocalyptic landscape. All these kids are, their parents have lost their mind and they're struggling, to kind of survive. So again, there's a lot of mental illness in that. And then with Don't You Recognize Me, clearly there's a lot of mental illness going on there.
But it's also about, also the judgmentalism of society is one of the big deals it's definitely a theme that you seem to obviously keep coming back to. And again, come on, you're filmmakers, you can't help but put yourself out there, and that's the dangerous part, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that is the appeal as well. It's one of those weird things, because you're right, like horror films, if I see a horror film gets 3 stars, I think, that must be pretty good, because that's kind of considered the 5-star for horror films as the general media goes. But it is like, you make films and you want to put them out there, and I do think, and that's that weird thing where people kind of, either they worry that you might be too sensitive if you get negative reviews and stuff. We want the films to be seen. I really, if I could get the film reviewed and watched by thousands of people and they all said they didn't really like it, I'd be delighted that they watched it. It really would, because that is the appeal, to say it. If people don't like it for what it is, that's absolutely fine.
Well, it's a wonderful contradiction about horror films, is that they're maligned, and they're also one of the industry best thing to go to if you want to make some money and 100%. have anything close to a guarantee that you're not going to lose out. And let's face it, the Horrorthon has really grown. And I mean, how old is it now? 10 years?
No, way more than that.
I think it's 20 or the 21st.
Holy God.
Yeah.
And
Am I wrong?
But
no, it was the 8th or 9th in 2006. So yeah, it must be the 20th or thereabouts. Yeah.
Wow.
I think it's the 20th.
Congratulations, Edwina.
Good on you, Edwina. Yeah. You're a great support.
Long may she live. But yeah, I mean, that's amazing. The Horrorthon. I remember when it was like 3 movies over a weekend.
Yeah.
And now it's nearly swamping the whole of IFI.
Here's something you may not know, but I designed the logo for Horrorthon.
Oh, did you?
Eyes are mine, not actually
major
my
kudos.
Eyes, but
yeah.
I designed it.
But no, it is actually, and this year particularly is one of the years where it's actually mostly new content, which is kind of interesting, because at some stages in the earlier days it was a lot of retrospective screenings, which were great, because it was a chance for us all to see films we loved on the big screen. But now it's actually...
I was a bit disgusted now with, I think they could have picked better Peter Cushing movies now to do a retrospective.
I love Cushing, I have to say.
And I don't mind those movies, but they're not good Peter Cushing movies.
Yeah.
Twins of Evil, come on.
True.
Yeah, it's always a thin line where you wonder whether people are trying to aim at ones that you haven't seen as opposed to celebrating.
But I'm surprised Christopher Lee. I mean, how long did Christopher die this year or last year?
Last year, I think.
It was last year. Okay.
I could be wrong, actually, though. It's been a long year.
There's been a lot of deaths. But anyway, we'll come back to the festival in a minute. But back to this idea, the strength of horror and its fandom. It's great. You always get, it's like with good comic books, with good sci-fi, you get really solid fans. I mean, where's the horror channel that we need that's online where people can go and watch horror films that works on a Netflix?
It's called Shudder UK. It just launched last week or this week.
Okay,
so basically the Netflix for horror films.
I don't feel too bad. Yeah. I would be more embarrassed if we'd had it for the last 2 years.
No, but it's because I hadn't heard of it either. I think they've been over in America before, but they've launched over here. And I found there is another one over in England, but I can't quite remember the name of them. But yeah, it's a growing trend. Now, again, of course, these are newer things, so they have a good back catalogue of stuff. You've got some Bava, you've got Herschel Gordon-Lewis, but you're not going to have, like, the Halloween's 1 to 8. You're not going to have
Herschel is the funny one. I don't know where
2000
he fits
Maniacs
in my
is a
head
good film.
for horror. I do like his movies.
I still find it very disturbing. I mean, the violence level is
Do you know,
horrendous.
it's funny you say it, because I bought a copy of Gore Girls about 4 years ago.
Just for the title.
And I'm still only halfway through it.
Oh, no, they're hard watches.
It's the worst special effects ever. But the notion of it is just
really
twisted.
disturbing. Yeah, really disturbing.
And that's with bad sets, with curtains to disguise the windows, and really weird comedy.
Yeah.
And yet I couldn't watch it. I think some poor stripper got her face put out in a griddle, and I thought, okay, right, that's not as amusing as I thought it was.
But he was a marketing guy. Like he knew, like, you know, he made these films from a marketing point of view, knowing if he had these things that they could actually sell. And I think actually,
you still want the bottoms to say on the seat. So we had this thing chatting the way down about a horror audience that they like horror, but they don't want to be horrified all the time.
Yeah.
And I think you guys understand that in the way you presented your ideas. You know, there's though there's discomfort in them. You don't want someone vomiting. You don't really want them traumatized when they've left the cinema and not want to live their lives afterwards.
There are extreme films. I say, like, you know, like films like Martyrs and the earlier Saw films and stuff, which I quite enjoy. You know,
I think Martyrs is a great movie.
Yeah, it is, but it's a great movie regardless. It uses extreme violence, and I'm okay with that. But I do agree with you. It's kind of become a big problem for the horror genre over the last couple of years, where it has become increasingly reliant on outrageous, very kind of depraved violence, but with nothing else to it. And so, you know,
I agree. So we're kind of back to what we said earlier. I mean, I find horror films can be some of the most moral filmmaking you're going to see in a week. But
you'd miss the story, you know, and it makes me sound like an old codger, but like, even when you watch the older films, like, I can't remember what I was watching the other day, but they always had a story to them. You know what I mean? There were characters, and even if it was a very basic moral, like the good girl survives or anything like that, but there was something to it. They were fairy tales for adults, which is what's really nice about it, and it pushes those kind of fear buttons. But there's more to it than just.
Well, as you said, Martyrs still has all that.
Absolutely,
it has that terrible, nasty cinema. But I mean, I'd rather watch Martyrs than Irreversible.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah. But you think as well,
and that's not a horror film.
No.
The French have they started to lead that way of having extreme violence, but great characterization, so that you really felt the pain of
inside
those characters. You really did, and that's true. I think it is about again going back to performance. If you built a strong character in the film, if you really believe in them, you can do the slightest nasty thing and it's a curveball thrown at people. But if there's no character and you know that people are just there to be murdered, then it's like, here we go again.
Yeah, you know? It's like a kind of throwback to 70s slasher movies when you get to
see
different types of bold people getting chopped up.
Because I'm not sure, like, even Jason, when you were rehearsing for your thing, but like the main rehearsings I did were my two leads with Eddie Murphy, or Ed Murphy, so he doesn't get confused with certain other people.
Eddie Murphy?
I know, yeah. And Elva Trill on it. But what we worked on the scenes was the earlier scene in the cafe where they're discussing, because it was getting that connection between the two of them. And if you got the relationship and that balance and the power play kind of thing going on right from there, the rest will actually feed through. Like, I still think even as a horror filmmaker, of course you have to worry about the set pieces and the scares and stuff, but if you have the character and tone right, that's going to get you a lot of the way. If you're just focused on the set pieces, I think you're in trouble.
As we said, you have to care. Yeah. If you don't care on some level,
if I want to kill all the characters within the first 5 minutes, I think that's the biggest problem for some, especially the remakes of horror films that are coming out nowadays. I despise the people from the first scene.
What example might you give of a recent successful film that you felt did that? The negative aspect, that you didn't really give a damn?
Oh, I could probably say a lot of them. Like, you know, and even because I'm a big fan of the Blumhouse movies, but there's some of their, like the original Ouija one, I know they have a new one out with Mike Flanagan's meant to be a lot better, but the first one, it was about as lazy as you could get. I've
heard the same about the new one, actually.
Yeah, I haven't seen that one yet.
The term kitchen sink was used.
Yeah, it's just it's just sad because you know these are people who understand how to do it right and everything like that. But yeah, or even like for particularly like the Friday the 13th remake and stuff like that. For me, it seemed to miss what the charm was about these earlier films, and they weren't high concept stuff from the beginning. Like, they were pretty basic films, but that was what was nice about it.
Oh yeah, and there was no doubt that who was making them was trying to make a buck at the same time.
But you were entertained watching it, and I think they come across as much more cynical nowadays, as if they're being run by people who literally know that horror fans are almost addicts who are just hungry for the next piece, and they know they can feed it to them. I don't think you take those same chances in different genres.
Yeah. Did you see, I cannot remember the name of it right now, but the director did the Evil Dead remake.
Don't Breathe.
Don't Breathe. What did you...
I haven't seen that.
Okay, well, we won't go too much into it. Did you think that was a good marker?
It's a weird one. Okay, because I know a lot of people liked it, and it's one of those things where I have no problem with other people liking it, but for me, the whole horror was based around just intensity and non-stop aggression, which kind of works to some extent, but it's not very rewarding for me. Yeah. You know, if you want to keep me on my toes by just constantly hitting me with new things, it's actually the peak and troughs. It's like a roller coaster. What you enjoy about a roller coaster is the slow build up, the sudden drop, which is shocking, and then it kind of levels out for a second, and then it slowly builds you up and drops. And that's why roller coasters work. They're not just one big drop. And I think Don't Breathe kind of aimed at just being this one savage drop of tension. And, you know, in a way, fine, because he does keep it up to the end. But I was just so jaded of it by about 45 minutes.
Well, I wasn't. I know what you're saying. I kind of agree. Sorry, we're talking about something else.
No, you're fine.
But no, but just trying to find that. I'm just trying to figure not what is the horror type, but the ones for me of recent years that I liked were again independent ones. We're Still Here. I love that. Yeah. I like Jim Mickle, and I actually have his remake of We Are What We Are, which I haven't watched yet.
Yeah,
I haven't seen it yet. So.
yeah.
But also there was my other one was It Follows. I felt artistically and entertainment wise, it hit most of the boxes.
Enjoyed It Follows.
Yeah.
I really like it. Just it felt like it was a film. Yeah, like it was giving you everything you wanted in a horror film. It was. Do you know what I liked about It Follows? And because the danger nowadays where people want their elevated horror to not touch on any of the tropes of horror. But what makes horror great is the tropes. It's the same way with a Western. I want to see a guy coming into town. I want to see a scene in the bar. You know, I want to see a shootout at the end. And if you think that's a problem, then just you don't enjoy the genre. Horror is exactly the same. And It Follows ticked all the boxes of the bits you want, but it also just had just enough difference and was well executed. And that was a very satisfying experience.
That opening scene with the girl on the beach and her leg broken in half is one of the most shocking images in a movie.
Yeah, but even that opening, the camera, that 360 camera movement, and it pays off so beautifully. But it was so subtle. Yeah. It wasn't a good example of it's not just a story; it's how you tell the story.
It is, and that opening scene is so important as well. Though I think in all, especially horror films, just to set a tone.
It brings us kind of back to the one we were just talking about. Don't Breathe. It's been seen as kind of being marked off that, and It Follows inadvertently set us off on a big heroines in horror films kind of. Did you call it subgenre? Which I'm kind of going, okay, grand. Yeah, you're giving no issue with that, but it just become a copycat thing. What's the other movie You're Next.
I enjoyed Your Next, actually. I like that.
Again, that was having fun. There was a bit of a nod and a wink going on with that.
But that's it. They were enjoying themselves with it. Yeah, I think Don't Breathe, it's that dangerous line that horror films have walked many times where it's that mixture between is it celebrating the last girl standing or is it about just watching a woman be brutalized for about 40 minutes and then at the end saying, hey, but she won, so doesn't that make it okay?
Yeah, because that even has a moment in halfway through which we won't discuss. You're not supposed to say that. He hasn't seen it, don't forget.
I've heard that there's something horrible happening.
Yeah, but it doesn't. See, it doesn't happen. That's
Levi,
but I felt that was kind of step too far. You really had to. You had the graph out for that moment. Well, we need something here.
But it's like Stephen King said, if he can't like creep you out, like it eventually builds up to a point where I'll just gross you out. That's like the last ditched attempt where you kind of aren't sure.
King's done that.
Oh, and he said he's not above doing it, but it's the when you can't make anything else work. That's where you go to.
Can I just talk then briefly about the whole retro horror thing? That is also a weird new subgenre.
Retro is in like Rob Zombie's effects?
Jim Mickle, Ty West, all kind of House of the Devil and stuff like that.
Yeah, I loved
House of the Devil.
And even Stranger Things. I mean, I've only seen 2 episodes myself, and it seems to be more Spielberg than King, but definitely there's huge amount of King in there. I mean, but you kind of get tired ticking off the box. Okay, yeah, that's Firestarter. That's this. Yeah, and there's that lovely. Pseudo John Carpenter score. Is it getting a bit tiresome?
No, but I think with Stranger Things, because it's set during that time, then you expect all of that. You expect the music, you expect the credits, the typography to be that way. And I think if you didn't do that, then people would go, well, why are they avoiding that? So I think it's true that they didn't need to set it during that time. It could have been set now, and they would have had. Well, it would have had a
whole different set of values. But
absolutely,
I think it's also another way for filmmakers to escape the curse of the mobile phone.
True, which it is, and you find yourself trying to write a reason.
I'm working on a script at the moment. It's the one thing that's upsetting my brain in terms of the tension I'm trying to build up in this woodland. Is a fucking mobile phones exist.
Don't you have an app for that?
Have you go online? There's a YouTube clip. It's a montage of called mobile phone cliches in horror films, and they're not really cliches, but it's all these wonderful excuses.
But you do,
and my favorite one was, I don't remember the movie. I think it was Jeepers Creepers. Wow, 97% of the country has coverage, and we're in the 1-3% that doesn't.
But see, I think that's a clever, because it's a really tricky one to do, and that you're trying to write it into your script in a way that you have to address this, and the audience knows you're going to have to address it somewhere, but you got to be trying in a way that, like, it's not a huge deal. and it just clarifies it within a line or two that you give a reasonable reason, because there's nothing worse than films that tie themselves in knots to try and justify as well why they can't.
Dropping it, kicking it. Oh, I forgot to charge
Or
my
someone gets
mobile
angry
phone.
and throws it against the wall and smashes it.
Yeah, but again, it's the bigger the cast, the more excuses you need for all your mobile phone misuse.
But you do, I can't remember what another kind of found footage one, but like it's where it's, we're going to the woods, we have to have fun, so they put all their phones in a plastic bag, like, and leave it in the car or whatever, and you're like, you know, it's grand because once we're beyond that, but it's a little too on the nose of like, okay, we're taking these away.
Yeah. You've given me an idea for a prologue. You start a prologue with mobile phone non-day.
Once upon a time in a galaxy without phones.
The networks have been shut down. For that one day, you don't have to use your phone. What will people do? Did they call it the purge?
The network purge. I think this could work.
But, okay, back to what we've been talking about is trying to get your film out there and get it sold is the hardest part. Because, as you say, like, talk about Blumhouse and people like Glasseye Picks, the next level. See, I hate using the term level. It suggests that they're better. They're not better, but they have more of a hold in the marketplace, and they're where you're really. At the moment. Well, in the independent market, they're strong. I mean, and Glasseye Picks been quiet lately, but they are busy enough, and you've got a bit of respect for them, kind of hand on heart. They really care about making the movies. It's not about just the book.
Oh yeah, they're making very strong. I mean, they gave Ty West his big chance of. I mean, I don't know whether you've seen Innkeepers, but I love
absolutely.
Well. And again, in a way, Ty West kind of reinvented the haunted house film as well with that. But he used all in-camera effects as opposed to CGI, so you weren't left with that. Oh, I don't believe that. You were left with real, tangible something in the room that you could almost reach out and touch, But I also loved about that, and again, we were talking about, its character. We had two characters in that film, and we really liked both of them, and especially the girl was really cute and really funny and really a lovely person. So...
Well, House of the Devil, you'd won. I'm a huge fan of House of the Devil. I know what you mean by the retro type thing, but I think with House of the Devil, T. West went back to that style of filmmaking, but he didn't use it as a lazy crutch.
Oh no, I wasn't even suggesting that. But I'm saying that it's become so.
But I do think some modern filmmakers are, even say.
I've enjoyed Stranger Things so far, but again, it is almost. But I hated Super 8.
Right.
J. Abrams Super 8 killed me.
See, like with Stranger Things and Super 8, I think
they're very, very similar. But Stranger Things has got great characters for a start.
Yeah. They rely a lot on nostalgia, though, which is setting a film in a period is one thing, but relying on people's enjoyment of nostalgia to sell a film, I find is a bit of a tricky one. Now, Stranger Things is still a good series that works on its own, and please, don't attack me on Twitter for not liking Stranger Things.
But the one Steven Spielberg no one seems to have mentioned with regard to Stranger Things is the Goonies.
Yeah, absolutely,
and it's in there.
I know I think more so than actually even E.T. and stuff like that. But it's a lazy approach in the same way relying on gore in your horror film is a lazy approach. There's no problem to use these things to your advantage. You should use every tool you have, but it shouldn't be the sole thing.
I think we hit the nail on the head. The horror comes from caring about the characters and then having something happen to them. That's it. Where it really happens.
It's real people in an unreal world. That's like, you can do anything to them that makes no sense. Say like even Hellraiser and stuff. It's just, it doesn't matter how crazy the event is. As long as the people at the core are us, they represent us, and their reactions have to represent at least somewhat how we would behave. As soon as they start acting silly, people tend to switch off.
But you also think of film directors, we'd been talking earlier about 60s and 70s film. You have these great directors who are directing drama and then they decide to do horror. See if Stanley Kubrick does The Shining. Incredible performance. A lot of people at the time thought Jack Nicholson totally hammed it up. But it's one of the best ham jobs ever in film. I mean, just that look, staring at the window endlessly. Shelley Duvall with a face like a cartoon. I mean, unbelievable. Looking people, great actors, brilliant at their craft. And then Nicholas Roeg, another one of the greats from the 60s and 70s, started out as a cinematographer. He gets Julie Christie and Donald Sutherland to make a genre film, Don't Look Now, which is an absolutely genius film. Have you seen that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And but you've got Rosemary's Baby and stuff as well. But I think what people forget, especially in this modern climate where people talk about elevated horror being the desired thing, which is, for people who aren't aware, basically a horror film that is okay because it's smart enough to justify being watched, which again is an insulting kind of a notion. But say Rosemary's Baby and The Shining and especially Don't Look Now would be considered perfect examples of what elevated horror would be, except you forget these were just great filmmakers who wanted to tell a certain story. They weren't setting out to either make a horror film or a drama. This was just that type of story, and they made it, and it was great. And people went to see them then. I don't know if there's the same. I think
Kubrick only made. That's the only horror film he made, except for unless you want to call Full Metal Jacket and Clockwork Orange horror films. Polanski only made one more horror film. That was Tenet.
Yeah.
Repulsion to some extent has elements
that's before
of...
that.
Yes.
But he also did the Fearless Vampire Killers.
That's right.
With the beautiful Sharon Tate.
But and Roig Wade, one more which I haven't seen. I don't want to see because I've heard sad things about a puffball.
Haven't heard of it.
It
I've
was
heard
made
of
in
it.
Ireland.
Okay, really?
Yeah, it's one of those kind of ones you kind of don't want to go near because you will be upset. So on that note, I mean, I think we sort of wrap things up.
Sure.
Let's say good luck with your films. I hope you get a great reception for them.
Thank you.
It's going to be a great festival again. It always is, and it's like some brilliant films on there. I still think Peter Cushing, in retrospect, we need to talk about it in Edwina.
Move on.
But what have you got? Any plans for the future in terms of I know I can tell, Jason, you just want to keep at it, and that's what you'll always do. And the same for you, Mark. If you go else.
Yeah, I have a couple of scripts with a few producers who are interested, but the big challenge is it's who can get a film moving quick enough. Because at the end of the day, as much as we love these films, and that is all I ever want to do, at my age now, I needed to be bringing in some money to be able to have some form of life. And that sounds like a kind of a shitty attitude to have, but it's not, because it becomes a very real reality to be able to go and do it. So yeah, it's trying to find that person who can actually help you get that next film. Because the reality is, I'll make another film no matter what. It's inevitable. That's stupid. But like, if you can find someone who can actually see it, whether they've seen a previous film or read that script, that can bring you on to the next level, that's got to be the goal. It's got to be the aim.
I'd be the same. Like I've done stuff for major networks and that, which were documentaries. But when it comes to doing something that you really love and you want to do, sometimes even though you're trying to get funding for it, you either go, well, I get funding and that's brilliant and it'll pay the bills, or do I just never make another movie? So to me, that's not an option. Already, another movie almost completed shooting called The Sweetest Morsel, which is a very violent gangster film.
You make Ben Wheatley look like he's slow making films.
I had a chat with him about that. It was very funny, actually. And then another one called The Paper Child, which is a psychological horror film starring Brian Murray, which is almost completed post-production. So that, and then I have in pre-production a haunted house film called Winifred Meeks, which is going to be a lot of fun to do. Quite a chiller. And again, I'm using like every film that I've always been a fan of, like The Haunting, the BBC Ghost Stories for Christmas, which were incredible.
Absolutely.
By
Whistle and I Will Come.
I just watched that yesterday for the first time.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
And did you get a shiver down your neck?
Absolutely.
It's amazing.
Your man,
Yeah.
the very noble guy, kind of bugged me a little bit in the first half, but when it came to the creepy tension, I was quite surprised by how much it caught me off guard.
Those stories are worth going back to read again
Yeah,
as well.
Seymour James was the godfather of the, well, not even the modern ghost story, because it would have been Victorian, Edwardian at the time when he was writing them.
He brought it into the genre. Are we all mad, or the ghosts, or are we all nuts?
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, well, congratulations on the two movies again.
Thank
and,
you.
Good luck with the future. I think hopefully digital is going to open up a whole new world that will help create the cash to get these things done.
I look forward to your next movie after.
Thank you very
after
much.
That beautiful debut feature, which I love.
Yeah, the next one I'm going to kill people, I've decided.
More money.
But I said, what? It's funny. I was just saying to my girlfriend, I said, "Do you know something? It's funny. Every time I said, anyone I know who either makes horror films or loves horror films, it's always the loveliest people.
I'm not afraid to express.
You get it out of your system.
Get it
That's
out.
because a podcast is our therapy. That's why.
Thank you, gentlemen. That was superb.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks very much.